I'll begin this video by saying something which I've said on many occasions, which is that the time for bickering and arguing and going over every minute detail of theory is over. And it is high time that we got offline and started getting active in real life. We need to understand that the vast majority of our adversaries are not going to change their minds, are not going to concede, and we simply must defeat them in the real world. Now, I say this as someone who enjoys debate, who likes to argue. But there's a lot at stake, and it is very late in the day. So we need to realize that arguing with the normies, arguing with the SJWs, it really has served its purpose. We know where we stand, they know where they stand. Now it's time to get offline and start winning in real life. But with that said, it's always important to keep in mind that, of course, we should continue red-pilling, waking up our friends and family. That we should always look to bring more people to our side. And we do this with dialogue. We do this with argumentation. And so this video is going to be about providing you with an arsenal so that on the occasion where you find yourself in a discussion or in an argument on social media with the normies or with your friends or family who haven't yet been red-pilled or etc., you will have a base of some fundamental arguments that you can build from. Many of you will already have been familiar with these arguments, use them, understand them, but for those of you who haven't, for those of you who might have just recently got off the centrist fence and are understanding the importance of ethno-nationalism, here are some arguments to help you comprehend in more detail what it is that you and we stand for. So, let's start first with the lowest hanging fruit, and then we'll work our way up. So here are some arguments, and all these are based on my own personal experiences, arguments that I've gotten into on social media or with friends and family. And so we'll start with how to argue the case for ethno-nationalism when dealing with the snowflakes, the SJWs, the normies, the people who will scream racist at you. So, in these occasions, I tend to simply use the Socratic method, which is basically questioning them repeatedly. So I'll say to them, is it racist to say that Turkey is for the Turks and that it should be for the Turks? Is it racist to say that Mexico is for the Mexicans and that it should be for the Mexicans? That Japan is for the Japanese, etc. And they'll usually say no. Well, then you ask them, so is it racist to say Ireland for the Irish, France for the French, Europe for the Europeans? And if they say, yes, it's racist because it's white supremacy or because it's privileged white people protecting their privilege, well then at this point you have a few options. You can walk away from the discussion, which is something I tend to do, because the second that someone denies the right of my people to exist unmolested in their own homelands, I know that I'm dealing with a serpent, with a mendacious, cowardly serpent, and I have very little patience for these people. So my work is basically done at this point. I've exposed them for what they are, And I have nothing more to say to them. They've told me everything I need to know about them, and I really have no more interest in the conversation. If the conversation continues, well, I have the advantage. I have the upper hand. So I normally always try to be polite and gentlemanly, because sometimes the person you're arguing with at the end will see your point. And especially when I'm arguing with people who are already on my side, but we have small disagreements. With them, I'm very polite and courteous, because I don't want to fracture. I don't want to punch people on my own team. So it's always important to maintain that courteous politeness. But in these occasions, when you're dealing with these mendacious serpents and you've exposed them for what they are, why not keep pressing on? And you don't have any reason to show these people mercy. You don't have any reason to be polite with them anymore. They hate you. They are denying you something that they've already conceded should be granted to everyone else, to every other race and ethnicity and nationality, except white people, except the European peoples. So just go full steam ahead and obliterate them. Okay? And, I remember the first time people started shouting at me, racist, fascist, bigot, all these things that I never thought I was. I consider myself very open-minded, xenophilic. I love other cultures. I love other peoples. And, people yelling at me fascist who don't even know what that means. It's just, how do you respond to that? How do you respond to being called a racist when you clearly aren't? And, the first time it happens, it's a bit of a shock to the system. And they know this. They know that calling someone a racist only works as a smear if the person they're calling a racist isn't. Because only a person who isn't racist would be put off, would be taken aback by such a smear. A genuine racist who hates other people, for example, Julius Malema in South Africa, doesn't care if you call him a racist. Doesn't care if you point out that he's being hateful towards whites. So it's a normal reaction, because we are decent people and we don't have hate towards other peoples. We have love for our people, but that's like saying that if you love your family, you hate all other families. So imagine if someone came to you and said, you love your wife and your children, or you love your husband and your children. That must mean you hate all other families, you hateful bigot. You'd be shocked. That'd be a shock to your system. But over time, you get a thicker skin. And you realize that it doesn't help your cause. It's a waste of time to start defending yourself from that accusation, because that's the first thing you're going to want to do. I'm not a racist. How dare you call me a racist? I have black friends. Okay? They don't care. And they are calling you that to put you off, to rattle you, to distract you from the argument and start defending yourself. So, again, when they call you a racist, just say, well then, is the Dalai Lama a racist? Because I'm just saying what he said, that Europe is for the Europeans. Is it racist to love my own family more than other families? Is it racist to say that the Irish people have a right to exist in Ireland? The Italian people have a right to exist in Italy. The Germans have a right to exist in Germany. And that it is immoral for them to be demographically replaced and displaced in their own homelands. If they continue to call you racist, fuck it. End the conversation or go full steam ahead and annihilate them. Those are your two options. Okay, then we have the no borders, citizens of the world. So these are the people who will come at you and they will say anyone has the right to live anywhere they want. I don't believe in borders. I don't believe in Ireland. If I want to live in Ireland, boom, I just walk into Ireland. What is Ireland? Who decides that that's a country? What's a border? If I want to just step across the border from Spain to Portugal, why shouldn't I be able to? And live there if I want. I'm a citizen of the world. This is usually a student, a privileged, middle-class student making this argument, who has no idea how the world works. And they think that simply because of the ease of travel in the 21st century, the idea of nationhood, nation-states, borders, should all just be obliterated. So they will say things like, everyone should be able to live wherever they want. Fine, you can believe that, and this is what my response is. You believe that, and I'll believe this. Every nation should be able to tell them to fuck off. Every nation should be able to decide some basic things. Who they let in, from where, and how many. That is nationalism. That is the idea of national sovereignty. And the idea of ethno-nationalism is that we need to do this to preserve the existence of fragile cultures, of the fragile ecosystem of an ethnicity. Again, I'll use Ireland as an example. There's a little under 4 million native Irish living in Ireland. That is a very small amount of people. Okay? That could be wiped off in a generation of mass immigration. And I won't have it. So, you don't get to decide that you can just live wherever you want. It doesn't matter. And also get into the details. Tell them, who are you going to be paying taxes to in this new world without borders? Okay? In Europe, we have universal healthcare, socialized medicine. So do you think you can just walk into other countries and start taking from their social services that you haven't paid into? How's that going to work? How is that sustainable? Okay? What about the job market? You think you can just walk into countries and get a job, that you're entitled to a job? What about the native population and the jobs that they need? It's an unworkable, unsustainable, ridiculous, naive position. And it's so arrogant. And then you might hear a response. I've come across this on Twitter with some pretty horrific people. I will say to them things like, no, nations have the right to decide who they let in, how many, and from where. And they'll say things like, no, you don't get to decide who you let into your community. It's basically the anti-segregation argument. They're sort of living in the 60s and the age of desegregation. And so the idea is, and usually it's Americans that are making this argument, I think. But the idea is, if millions of people want to come and live in your neighborhood, you don't get to tell them no. Okay, but let's just follow this to its logical conclusion. What else do I not get a say in? Do I have the right to decide who lives in my own fucking house? Okay? You have to understand this. They hate you. They hate us. They hate themselves if they are sadomasochistic white people. They don't want us to exist. So ask them, if I don't have the right to decide who and how many people get to live in my community, my nation, then on what grounds will you stand? And on what grounds do you criticize colonialism? And on what grounds will you stand if white Europeans were to just say, hey, you know what? The world was so much better when we ruled it. Let's do that again. On what grounds are you going to complain about Russia annexing Crimea? On what grounds are you going to complain about Turkey wiping out the Kurds? You don't have a leg to stand on. If you're going to say that anyone has the right to move wherever they want, no one has the right to say no, you don't have grounds to stand on to oppose invasions, occupations, colonialism, none of it. You're walking yourself into an inhumane trap solely because you hate the peoples of Europe and the descendants of Europe so much. Okay. And then again, when you're dealing with these people, usually the practicalities of a borderless world show them that it's impossible and that it's impractical and dangerous. But you might get some hardliners who start insulting you and saying that you don't have a right to a nation, you don't have a right to a community, anyone can live there, etc. And again, when that happens, you're dealing with a serpent, cut off their head, toss the body in the bushes, and proceed to the next argument, which is the gas chamber's slippery slope. So, these are the people who will say that nationalism leads to genocide. And here's what you need to focus on in this argument. Don't start getting into historic details. Many of you are autistic savants when it comes to the history of the Second World War, and you're very woke on what really happened, and you're very woke on the lies that we've all been fed since childhood. And so you might be tempted to get into an argument of historical facts. But that might not be the most useful, because they'll just call you a Nazi and you won't make any progress. When people start telling me that my nationalist beliefs or my ethno-nationalist beliefs, which we'll get into the difference later, is the road to genocide, I simply tell them that it's the opposite, because they don't understand what ethno-nationalism is. They don't understand what it is in the 21st century. They don't understand what, at least in my case, what I am arguing for. I am arguing for respect for all people's rights to nationhood and homeland. And this respect will prevent war and prevent genocide. Because, for example, in Europe, a continent racked with conflict, if in Europe the European peoples can shake off ethno-masochism and embrace ethno-solidarity, a pan-European sense of brotherhood, ethno-solidarity. We're going to get into this theme a bit more later, but it's the idea that Europe is our homeland. We are all Europeans. We all have very diverse lineage. I mean, even someone who's 100% Italian, if they're a Northern Italian, especially, they might have some Germanic in them. An Iberian might have a bit of Celtic in them. The Welsh, the Irish, the Scottish, and the English are all genetically linked. We are a very diverse group of people. We already have all the diversity that we need. Thank you very much. And so, ethno-nationalism in the 21st century is the idea of something a bit new, something that hasn't really occurred before. It's a new solution to the new problem of multiculturalism, which is ethno-solidarity, the peoples of Europe, white people, doing something that they don't usually do, which is collectivize and work in solidarity. That's not to say that we should eliminate or depreciate the cultural and genetic differences between the Hungarians and the Poles and the Finns and the Swedes and the Irish and the Italians and the French and the Spaniards, etc. No, the opposite. We should celebrate it and preserve it. And then, after we have established ethno-solidarity for Europeans, we simply just extend that respect and that solidarity to the rest of the world. So we respect that Nigeria is for the Nigerians, and we want them to thrive in their homeland. That Japan is for the Japanese, and we want them to thrive in their homeland. And we would not wish upon them mass immigration, demographic replacement, displacement in their own homelands, exploitation, war, invasion, any of that, because we have a system based on respect, genuine respect for the diversity of the world's peoples. And so all of this is actually already observable. Guy Verhofstadt is an authoritarian bureaucrat who worships the European Union and truly despises the idea of nations and national sovereignty. But he goes on Twitter constantly with the hashtag #IamEuropean. So, the idea that we need to foster European solidarity is already in the ether. And we already see it when we have the European Union. It's not the World Union, that's what they want. It's the European Union, a union for the European peoples. It was originally, the free movement of peoples was a privilege of Europeans. Because we share a continent, we share a homeland. And so, they also even will say things like the EU keeps Europe at peace. So they already know that that's arguable, as we're seeing in France. Tanks with the EU flag on them steamrolling protesters. But this idea that with more solidarity, with more European brotherhood, we have more peace, more cooperation. So this idea is already well understood. And it's ridiculous then to say that with more solidarity and more respect for the nations of Europe and the indigenous peoples of Europe and the nations of the rest of the world, that this would lead to genocide. I think that's just absurd. Okay? It will lead to some other things, like deportations. It will lead to maybe constitutional amendments declaring who the land is for. It might lead to moratoriums on immigration, but those are not anywhere near the same thing as genocide or war. In fact, they are the things that prevent it. I saw this the other day, a map of different packs of wolves and their movement patterns in Yellowstone National Park, and they never cross over. They understand that that's the territory of one wolf pack, this is our territory, and that's another wolf pack's territory, and they never step over the boundaries. So, bloody animals understand the importance of respecting other people's, or other animals' territory. Why can't we? Why would that lead to genocide? All right. Then, you have another type of challenge to your argument. You'll come across this person. These are the birthers. And I'm not talking about Donald Trump and Barack Obama type birtherism. These are the people, almost always ignorant Americans, who think that all of the world has a system of citizenship which operates on a jus solis basis. That is, he who is born on the soil of a country is automatically a citizen of that country. This is what the United States has and is proving to be a nightmare, which has led to the phenomena of anchor babies. Migrants running into Europe, popping out a baby, as we just saw with that Honduran migrant who made the news, jumps a fence, pops out a baby, And that baby is now an American citizen. But America is one of the few countries who has this system. Most of the world has a by blood, jus sanguinis system. It's your blood, your heritage, your lineage, your birthright that grants you citizenship. And so when someone says, well, he was born in Italy, some African, for example, therefore he's just as Italian as anyone else, you can say, no, neither in theory nor in practice is he an Italian, because the Italian system is based on blood. And you can say something like this: is a hamster born in a stable a horse? No, it isn't. Similarly, an African born on Italian soil is not an Italian. Now, in some cases, when they turn 18, these Africans have the opportunity to elect Italian citizenship, and they become citizens. And that's fine. We should be reducing the numbers of that. We should be making sure that that happens much less frequently. But if an African born to Somali parents on Italian soil lives all his life in Italy, turns 18, and has the option to choose Somali citizenship or Italian citizenship, what do you think he's going to choose? Good for him. Good choice. You chose Italian citizenship. Wow, what a surprise. Okay, but this is the whole point of protecting the ethnicity. Let's be honest. You are an Italian citizen, but you are not an Italian. And that's the difference that we're trying to point out, and that's what ethno-nationalism is about. You can live with us. You can contribute to our society and benefit from it as a citizen. But you are not Italian. You are not ethnically Italian. And like I said, we need to make sure that those numbers keep going down. Now, another thing you can say. A passport doesn't give you our identity. An Irish passport doesn't make you Irish. A French passport doesn't make you French. Our identities are not just pieces of paper. Our ethnicities are not just pieces of paper. If Rachel Dolezal was mocked universally for thinking that she could just call herself black, put her hair in an afro, and get a really deep tan and call herself black, then why is it not equally risible that you can just sign your name on a piece of paper and become a European, become an Irishman, become a Frenchman? And these are also ethnicities. These are also indigenous peoples that go back centuries, millennia. They are not just something that you can pluck off the shelves of a supermarket. Well, today I want to be French. Actually, no borders. Let me just hop over the border there. Now I'm Spanish. No, this is so disrespectful and immoral, and it needs to stop. So then you'll have people saying things like, well, these people are born here. They're just like us. They have all of our rights and all of our privileges and all that sort of thing. None of our responsibilities, of course. They can totally subvert our societies and our culture. They're not beholden to respect it or contribute to it. No, just they have our rights and privileges. Well, when they talk about that, like usually they get triggered because I'll say to these people, doesn't matter if they're born here, they have to go back. They have to go back. Just like their parents, they have to go back. And that really triggers them. And they'll say, you can't make us leave. To which I respond, there is such a thing as revoking citizenship. There is such a thing as deportation. You keep poking the sleeping bear of the European peoples. And we're waking up. Do you really think that if you keep pushing us, we are not going to respond in kind and start taking measures to defend ourselves? So citizenship can be revoked. People can be deported. And the activists who try and stand in the way and stop the deportations can be thrown in prison. I'm all for these things. And then, apart from that, ethno-nationalism means protecting and preserving the ethnic peoples, the indigenous peoples of the country. So these non-ethnic peoples, but who are citizens, can actually have some of their privileges and their rights diminished. And this is not a human rights violation. They don't have to have the right to vote, for example. That's not a human rights violation. I mentioned before, I live in Spain, totally legally, totally my right to live here. But I don't get to vote in Spanish elections. Is that a violation of my human rights? Of course not. Okay. Ethno-nationalism, in its political manifestation, can also be represented by things like impeding or prohibiting political activism carried out by the non-native population, by the non-ethnic, non-indigenous population. So that way we don't have, the Muslim Brotherhood or CARE or all of these organizations, these POC organizations, demanding special treatment, demanding special privileges that are not afforded to the native population, and being politically active and subversive in our democracies. If you support democracy and defend it, you need to realize that multiculturalism and mass immigration and non-nationalist tendencies threaten democracy and turn it into nothing more than breeding wars, mob rule, and competition between groups to get what they want, and not working towards a unifying, singular, mutually beneficial goal. Okay, other things that can be done with this birther problem. Well, they're born here, so what are you going to do about it? We can have a tax on their children. People who are here, that are citizens, but they are not of us, they are not of our ethnicities, they are not of our nation. We can put a tax on the number of children they have. I think this is absolutely vital, because they are outbreeding us. And in the case of the Muslim migrants, they are doing so because they are compelled to by their religion. You can check out Bill Warner and his website, Political Islam, to learn all about that. So in order to protect ourselves, we need to start taking some certain measures. And taxing the children had by non-native citizens is one of them. You want to have 6, 7, 8 children on our soil? Okay, a tax on each one, and that tax increases with each child. Now, this will also have to be done on a case-by-case issue. We have people who have been born here, that have lived here all their lives. Can we deport them? Is that justifiable? Is that cruel? Some of this will have to be a case-by-case issue. But I certainly don't think it's cruel. Not at all. What's cruel is inviting all of the world to live on the European continent, to live in the West. What's cruel is the demographic replacement of the indigenous peoples of Europe and their dispossession of their own homelands. Because unlike the Jews, we don't have an Israel to go to. When we lose our homelands, where else do we have to go? Keep that in mind. When we lose our homelands, what's left? Where are we going to go? America? America's even worse off than most European countries. Canada? Justin Trudeau is doing everything he can to destroy it. Australia? I don't want to live there. Everything is poisonous and wants to eat you. Okay, so we need to protect our homelands. The cruelty was sending and inviting all of the world into our homelands without any respect for us or our people. Okay, that's the birthers argument, the people who come at you and say, well, what are you going to do about the people who are born here, grew up here, they're citizens just as much as we are? Well, in some cases, no. They don't have that citizenship just by being born on the soil. And those are the other practical things you can get into. All right, the next one, like I said, working our way up from the low-hanging fruit, we get to the Civnats, the civic nationalists, the classical liberals, the people who go on about values. People say things like, I don't care about race, I don't care about ethnicity, I don't see color. The only thing I care about is that these people that come to our countries embrace our values. Now, civic nationalism, the response to these arguments, is to simply point out that civic nationalism is simply death by 1,000 cuts. It's the great replacement with mindless flag waving. It is untenable. So, for example, last year, I think it was last summer, in London, there was the Day of Freedom, the Rally for Freedom. And a lot of people on the right, a lot of people on the classical liberal side, the alt-right even, Lauren Southern was there, Tommy Robinson, etc. They all gathered to oppose globalism, oppose censorship, oppose the SJWs. And you had people like Count Dankula giving a speech. And again, I like all these people. I think they're very sound. I like their content. I respect them as creators and thinkers. But that doesn't mean I can't criticize them and point out where they're misguided. So Count Dankula gets up and delivers a speech. And he says, I denounce ethno-nationalism. I'm not an ethno-nationalist. If you want to come to my country and respect the freedom of others, you are welcome in my country. Could the criteria be any lower? That's all it takes to live in the UK? Just respect freedom? Why don't you just let in, then, I don't know, half the world? Okay, that is such a low standard. And how does it solve the problem of Savilletown? How does it solve the problem of London, of Birmingham? Places where the native British are the minority, are totally dispossessed of their land, of their city, of their community. Also, how are you going to enforce your values? How are you going to ensure that the people that you're inviting in embrace your values? How are you going to define what those values are? Respecting freedom? Freedom to do what? Freedom to have 2 wives? Child brides? Practice FGM? Freedom for what? This idea of just, it's all liberty. As long as we all have our liberty, everything's fine. The civic nationalists, the values types, need to understand that if Western civilization was just an idea, just a system of values, then why doesn't it exist outside of the West? We cannot be the only civilization that is totally cut adrift from the people who built it and comprise it. Okay, how does civic nationalism solve the housing crisis? How does it solve the mass immigration crisis? How does it solve the fact that the constant arrival of more people leads to more and more urbanization and more destruction of our natural resources, our natural landscapes? our parks, our fields? How does it solve the problem of the fact that people my age will never be on the property ladder? How does it solve the problems of straining the welfare state, straining the social services? Okay, so the civic nationalists realize that, okay, mass immigration is a problem, immigration is a problem, we need to reduce it, etc., etc. But then they stop and say, well, I don't care about race. Or as long as the immigration is legal, as long as they embrace our values. Well, in the UK, for example, legal immigration is already at astonishing levels. It's, I think, what is it, like 300,000 people legally enter Britain a year? That's a massive number of people. And that's not counting the illegal immigration and the fake refugees and all that. In the United States, it's the same. The Americans, as long as they come here legally, that's hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. And then again, with that values thing, just look at what's happening. We don't even have to talk about hypotheticals. Look at what's happening. Do you see non-Europeans embracing European values? Do you see non-Western people embracing Western values? Or do you see the opposite? Remember, the West right now is going through a period of total decay and degeneracy. Why would anyone want to adopt that, embrace that? Especially when most of these people are coming from countries and cultures that are very confident and strong. And also, I find it very interesting that the people who go on about diversity seem to actually have very little appreciation for true diversity, and the people who go on about values seem to have very little respect for the values of others. I've mentioned this in another video. I don't actually mind if people in Muslim countries, Islamic countries, want to practice Islam and everything that entails. There are things about Islam that I find despicable, and it breaks my heart that there are countries where these Islamic practices exist and are dominant, but it's not my responsibility, and it's not the responsibility of my European Western brothers and sisters to destroy their culture, change their religion, impose my values on them. That's for them to solve. That's for them to deal with in their lands. If they want to practice Islam in their lands, fine. But don't come to my country and start bringing your practices to my country. That's it. But the Civnats and the my values people want them to come here, and it seems like they want them to, give up their culture and give up their values and give up their traditions and embrace ours. And I don't think I'm strawmanning here. I think that's what what's his name? Yaron Brook said, that we need to give these people a genuine culture and, show them that their culture is barbaric and replace their barbaric culture with our genuine, noble culture. I don't like the sound of that. I don't want to live in a world where everyone is just Western, especially when current Western culture is just empty consumerism and spiritually empty. So I'm not a big fan of that, just invite the whole world in as long as they embrace our values, because it doesn't work. Multiculturalism doesn't work. There's no evidence to show that it does. There's plenty of evidence to show that it doesn't. And even if it could work, why would you want it to? That sounds very bleak and boring. Okay. Then they say they don't care about race. When you deal with a person that says they don't care about race, that's fine, actually. You can have a pleasant conversation with them. The Civnats, the classical liberals, you can usually have a pleasant conversation. I would say, in the occasion that people come at me and say that they don't care about race, I respond Well, I don't really either. I care about the ethnic indigenous peoples of Europe and European descent. They say, I don't see skin color. I don't care about skin color. As if this is only about skin colors. As if we're talking about differences that only go as deep as melanin in your skin. You can point out that we're not just talking about that. We're talking about IQ. We're talking about differences in behavior. Observable differences in the behavior of different racial groups. We're talking about different diseases that some racial groups are more susceptible to and others aren't. Okay, there's a lot of differences in the races that are important. And, with these people, I don't think they're going to concede much. So usually I just say, maybe you don't care about race, but I do. And I don't want to live in a society that is totally foreign. I don't want to live amongst people who are not of my kin. And I don't want my children to grow up in a society that is even more foreign. And I don't want them to grow up in a society where they are the minority in their own country. Not because minorities are necessarily treated badly, although it's guaranteed that white minorities will be treated horribly. But also just because of the fact that it's immoral and it's unjust that should happen. And it would be also just very alienating, and they wouldn't have anywhere else to go. I mean, we see it time and again that whites aren't allowed to collectivize. Whites aren't allowed to have their own space. They aren't even allowed to be proud of who they are. So in 30 years, 40 years, if nothing changes and my children are growing up where they are the absolute abject minority in their own country and they have nowhere else to go to escape to, that bothers me, and I will pretty much do everything I can to stop that from happening. Okay? I would do anything to stop that from happening. So they may not care about race, but we do. And we can educate them as much as we can. We can use rhetoric. We can use facts. We can appeal to their empathy. Like, why would you want to grow up in a foreign society? Why would you want my children, your children, to grow up in a foreign, atomized, unrecognizable society? And then again, just do you think that people of other races will uphold the civilization created by the white race, the European peoples? Okay, let's move on to the last one, the defeatists. These are the people who will say that it's too late for ethno-nationalism. It's impossible to stop. It's inevitable that you will be replaced, that, lol, your grandkids are going to be brown, that the Negroid Asiatic person is going to replace the European man, the Western man. And they'll also say things like, there's no such thing as white identity anyway, so what are you standing for? Okay, so let's take this apart piece by piece. It's difficult. It's certainly going to take a long time to undo the damage. But it depends on the country. It will be certainly much easier to establish ethno-nationalism in Eastern Europe, in countries like Poland or Hungary. Ethno-nationalism is pretty much the default for the majority of countries outside the West. I say it again. No one disputes that Turkey is for the Turks. Japan is for the Japanese. No one disputes this. Now, there are some rumblings of people trying to bring multiculturalism, mass migration, and diversity and all that shit to countries like Japan. But for the time being, the Japanese people are not facing demographic replacement. The Turks are not facing that. The Mexicans aren't. The Nigerians aren't. It's only happening in the West. So this idea that it's impossible for European nations to impose ethno-nationalism and clearly define that their country is for their people is ridiculous, because every other country pretty much has that. Now, in other countries, it'll be more difficult. I think America, the United States, is in a very, very bad situation. But I don't want to abandon my American friends and family and brothers and sisters. I don't want to abandon them to a horrific fate. So, will an ethno-state be established in the United States? No. But things can be done to preserve what's left of the ethnic composition, what's left to preserve that fragile ecosystem of the United States. Build the wall. Immigration moratorium. Deportations. All these things are possible. Barack Obama deported more people than any president combined, and the media didn't say a word about it. No one batted an eye. So, eventually the media will just collapse, and they will just be kicking and screaming like insane maniacs, and no one will be paying attention to them. And so, if we win politically, we can certainly have presidents and politicians who support deportations of all sorts of people who are in the United States and don't have any right to be there. Build the wall, control immigration, reduce it, eliminate it for a few years. Many things can be done. Repeal the 1965 Immigration Act. Reform immigration so that it favors Europeans and people of European descent. Do away with things like diversity visas. Those are all things that can be done to help preserve what's left of the United States. In Europe, there's much more hope and much more realistic possibility. Again, depends on the country. Britain is in a pretty bad way. So is Germany. Okay? But we also have to defend what's left and stand up for countries like Ireland. Ireland is being hit really hard right now by the progressive globalist agenda. We can stand up for them and defend them, unite with them. Again, that idea of solidarity, pan-European ethno-solidarity. We can stand up for countries like Poland and Hungary, Czech Republic, etc., and protect the countries that are still a bit more homogenous and intact. And again, anything is possible with political will. And we can do all sorts of things to make it uncomfortable for the people who are here who are not of us, so that they leave voluntarily. This goes back to what I was talking about with the birthers. Making things difficult, denying them access to all of our social benefits, eliminating their welfare, denying their political activism, no vote, all sorts of things like that. And people will just start leaving eventually. And then, when they say things like there's no such thing as white identity, this is really interesting because what they're doing is they are simultaneously using European diversity against the European peoples while saying things like, we need more diversity, and diversity is our strength, etc., etc., which is just further proof that diversity means no white people. Because Europe and the European peoples are the most diverse on the planet. The diversity of languages, the diversity of cuisine, the diversity of cultures is so vast and so deep, it's unlike anywhere else. And then we have the diversity of genetics. I mentioned, an Italian might have some Germanic in him. The Welsh, Irish, Scottish, and English are all genetically intertwined. The Iberians might be having some genetic connection with the Frankish people. Who knows? We all have a little bit of that in us. So we already are very diverse. But why should our diversity prevent us from having solidarity and collectivizing. They don't want us to have white identity or pan-European solidarity, because if we did, we'd be unstoppable. This is a gaslight. Don't fall for it. So if they say there's no such thing as white identity, well, one thing you can say is, maybe there isn't yet, but that's what ethno-nationalism will provide. This is a new philosophy. It's a new political movement. It's a new spiritual movement. Some of the ideals of it are quite old, but the idea of a pan-European solidarity, an ethno-solidarity, that we all realizing that, yes, we might have differences between cultures and peoples. The Hungarians and the Germans are different. The Swedes and the French are different. But we all share this European history. And we have centuries of migration and movements and interactions, invasions, wars, but also alliances and trade and learning from each other, benefiting each other. That's our identity. That's who we are. And anyone who's going to deny that to us can fuck off. And they're denying it to us because they know that we will steamroll them if we come together. You can take that tack, or you can just argue that, tell a patriotic French person that he has no French identity. That's what Macron told the French, and we see how that's going over now. Okay? So, those are the main arguments that I've come across when I profess ethno-nationalism. And then, people come at you with practical details. And this is something that, libertarians go through when they argue a world without taxes. Well, who will pay for the roads? You start getting to practical issues. And so, people say, what about the mixed race people? What about them? What about them? Nothing about ethno-nationalism means that we can't have some immigration. It has to be totally, I think, reduced, a moratorium for a few years, maybe even a decade, so that we can recover. But once we've preserved our people and our homeland, there's no reason that we can't have immigration. We decide immigration from where, how many, and who. Okay, but there's no reason why we can't do what we've always done for centuries. Italians living in France, French people living in England, English people living in Germany, Germans living in Sweden. This is nothing new. We have things like Erasmus. We had, the free movement of peoples. That might have to go. It's a shame, but it is what it is. Okay, and mixed race people. So what? It's not like they make up some grand majority of people. And the people who are mixed race, if they work for the mutual benefit of the society and the nation, and if they contribute, there's, in my opinion, nothing wrong with a handful of mixed race people, and it won't be a problem going forward. Because the people who will want to miscegenate will have to leave. If you want to marry or have children with an African, you'll have to go to Africa. If you want to marry and have children with an Asian, you'll have to go to Asia. This makes people get all upset because it's like, oh, you're restricting who people can love and all that. No. Most people don't race mix. And that's true of all races. So this is a non-issue. I have people in my family who are white, married to Asians, etc. It's not really a problem for me. I'm simply saying that the vast majority, 90% of the population of, say, Poland, should always be Polish. The vast majority of the population of Ireland should be Irish. The vast majority of the population of France should be French. But I'm not arguing for total ethno-purity. That would be impossible. And also, I don't think it would be very beneficial. So a handful of mixed race people don't represent much of a problem. What we have to address is the problem going forward and stopping this before it gets out of hand. And that is the point of opposing the Great Replacement and the dispossession of our peoples. And then, people say, well, in the 21st century, travel is just so easy. How are you going to stop the movements of peoples into your nations when it's just so easy to travel these days? And that to me is just such a childish argument. The ease of travel does not necessitate the invasion of Japan and the replacement of the Japanese people. The fact that I can go there easier than at any time in history does not mean that I have the right to go there with millions of other whites and replace them. This is such a stupid argument. I can't even believe that it's raised. Well, it's just so much easier to travel to Europe now. How are you going to stop all these people from coming? By making it illegal. By building border walls and defending them with big soldiers with big-ass guns. By declaring constitutionally that Ireland is for the Irish. Germany is for the Germans. It is unbelievably immoral that we've gotten to the point where we have the native peoples being the minority in places like London. Native Brits, white British people being the minority in London, in Savile-town, probably in Birmingham when we see the new census. It is immoral that native Germans should be the minority in Frankfurt. This has to stop. That's what ethno-nationalism stands for. Stopping before it gets worse, healing the damage that's been done, and then going forward with new ideas about who our lands are for, how to protect them, how to preserve them, and how to ensure that they thrive. And anyone who's going to be opposed to this, I really think needs to reflect on what's at stake. So that's my message to the classical liberals and the civic nationalists. And the other people who are opposed to this are simply enemies that we need to defeat. So the snowflakes, the SJWs, the NPCs, the normies, whatever. We need to red pill them as much as we can, convince them as much as we can. But apart from that, if they don't want to be convinced, if they don't want to wake up, don't waste your breath. Let's just unite as a movement ourselves. Let's get active in the real world, and let's steamroll these people and make them irrelevant. I think that is the future. We can see it happening. All right. I think that's all I've got to say. Hope you enjoyed the video. Take care, and I will see you next time.